Today is day 1 of the April 87 7-day retreat. Since it is the first talk, let us speak again about listening to a talk and what the talks are all about. Many of us have been to many retreats, and the thought easily comes up, oh, that again. I've heard that. And if that thought is there and not seen and questioned and suspended, as it were, it has power. The power to prevent listening. Even though what is said has been said many times before, and the words may be old, the same words, yet the saying of it is new. Like the little green grass blades we talked about yesterday, poking and growing through the layer of straw, dead straw above. Each grass blade is new. It's not the old grass. So can the listening be new, unimpeded by knowledge of the old? The listening be free of the background, which we all have and share. A common background and a personal background. We all have personal backgrounds and common backgrounds. And that's what sits here and listens with its commentaries and wishes and fears and prejudices, comparisons. And therefore, the meditation goes on and the listening is at least only partial. So is it possible for there to be this wide openness without the power of the background? Listening not just to the words, but a deeper kind of listening, a more all-around, whole listening that doesn't exclude the drop of rain on the wood and the occasional twitter of birds. That doesn't compare what is heard with what was heard before and evaluate it. If that happens, to see it, to see the background with a new kind of seeing that doesn't say, oh, again my old background, why does it have to come up? That's more background. To see and to let be, go and come without reaction. Can one listen that way? not to make anything out of the person who is doing the talking. But to share in what is being said and to wonder. Either to wonder whether this is so or not so, or to see it immediately. Because no one can do this for one. The most dramatic and eloquent, clear talk cannot give anyone the power of seeing. That happens on its own when the mind is open. Not sheltered, not afraid, not clinging to the background for its identity. And to, with curiosity, with interest, find out whether what is said is really so. Not to want assurances that the person who is talking has experienced truth. I was just asked a few days ago in a letter whether I actually had experienced the truth of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and Buddhist principles. What if I said yes? What if I said no? Does it make any difference to the listening? Will one listen more because a person says, yes, I have experienced the truth? What does that mean? Anyways. So, it's a very important question. How will one be able to tell whether the person who is talking is not speaking out of the background? The background of the tradition, the background of the experiences, the background of what one has learned to repeat, to verbalize, to assert from reading and remembering. How can one tell? Whether what is said comes out of nothing. Just looking. Questioning, looking, and putting into words. Understanding the limitation of words. How will one be able to tell? By asking the person and getting an answer, yes or no? Or does one need to discern for oneself what is so? Not depend on certificates and accreditations that the person who's talking may be able to exhibit. Because what is crucial solely is that each one of us see and understand for ourselves, not depending on what someone else says, not taking over those words because that person has a ring of authority or is known to have had experiences. Then one is beholden to that person. And that prevents insight for oneself. I'm using those words for oneself cautiously. It's for no one. Insight is not for me. It's when me is not there, there's insight. So, can one, in listening, be open not to grab onto something, but is there a motive to grab onto something, to find out through the words of another? And can that motive be seen, illumined, and lose its power? Because that too affects the listening. The topics for our talks here in the retreat usually come out of questions that are asked by people in meetings. So, at the beginning of a talk, a question that has come up is restated. Usually not verbatim. For one thing, I cannot remember verbatim what someone has said. And also often, several people have had very similar questions, so it may be a synthesis of different questions put into a new one that covers the different aspects. So please don't feel misunderstood or misquoted. The question that is mentioned here is not exactly what was asked in a meeting. Of course, these questions are always mentioned anonymously. No one is being revealed here. And of course, it's only if this is a question which concerns all of us as human beings, not a very private and personal matter. So then, in looking at the question, if one can't follow, doesn't see it that way, questions remain, one wants to pursue it further, doesn't go along with it, then please bring it up in a meeting. That's what meetings are there for, not solely for that, but they're useful for that. So that you don't have to accept anything that is being said here. But we'll work through it again from afresh, from scratch. There's a lot of vitality in working together like that, in looking together at something and proceeding. I'm by no means infallible. Can make mistakes like anybody else. If you have the feeling this is what has taken place, please, let's discuss it. And if it is necessary, if it seems necessary, it'll be brought up in the next talk to revisit a question freshly again. And yet if one cannot understand something, cannot understand it logically, intellectually, can one also live with that not understanding? See the limitation of words and intellect, and sometimes leave a question sit there, or a statement. May have a ring of truth, but one isn't sure. So, can one leave it and allow it to operate in one's moment-to-moment living and observing. Not seek answers, but live with questions. Which may throw very unexpected light if they're really grabbing and insistent in the mind, in the brain. May throw unexpected light on how we think and act and speak and react with each other. One topic that has already come up and also came up for someone before retreat is what is concentration and what is awareness. I think it is good to look at this right at the beginning of a retreat. Maybe all of us or most of us have had what is called a spiritual practice at one time or another, maybe still have it. Most spiritual practices given to one by a teacher have something to do with concentrating the mind. Even it may not be expressed that way. One may be asked to concentrate on the breathing, observe the breathing, inhalation, exhalation, counted or not counted. But stay with the breathing. Or one may be concentrating on a koan, a word, a mantra, a question, who am I? A visualization. Of God or Buddha. Concentration on a concept like love or loving kindness, and so forth. In all of these practices, the instruction being, stay with that. Don't let the mind veer off from the task. And if it veers off, bring it back. That's the job. Bring it back to the breathing, back to the visualization, to the thought of loving kindness or the repetition of the koan, hu or mu. Very often the practice is also to concentrate this on a certain area in the body. In Zen tradition, it's this area below the navel. In other traditions, it is a point between the eyes or the tip of the nose, the top of the head. And connected with this work, this kind of working is, if one becomes proficient at it, a palpable feeling of energy in those areas in which the practice is concentrated. And with this palpable feeling of energy, which may manifest as heat or as a feeling of energy, strength. With that feeling, also a feeling of progress, making progress. And very often, one's practice in meetings with a teacher is evaluated in terms of the progress that one has made. Very often toward a very well-stated goal of enlightenment or insight or liberation, the different words for it. In learning to concentrate the mind in this fashion, one learns to suppress or reject or exclude from consciousness, from this concentrated awareness, whatever interferes with it, whatever is felt or labeled as a distraction. Thoughts are usually considered the enemy number one. And one can learn to use the practice, the concentrative practice, to chop off or repress thoughts as they arise. If they're not chopped off as they arise, there's no concentrative practice. There is then the fantasy of something pleasurable or something fearful or something boring. And then the mind, becoming aware of that, immediately endeavoring with expenditure of effort to get back to the concentration at the exclusion of what was going on. Many people experience this way of working or have experienced it as a battle that is going on, and the image of the warrior is frequently used for this kind of work. The battling with the enemy, the distractions. Actually, we're required to some extent in our schoolwork to practice concentration. There's no course in concentration, but we are admonished to pay attention to our homework or to the work that is put on the board and to our solving the problems, and not to fool around or look around or do other things. So concentrating on the work at hand, giving our energy to that, to the exclusion of what is considered fooling around or distracting oneself, maybe through looking out of the window. This has a precedence in our life. We mentioned the palpable energy that is a result of this concentration, which is one has an indicator of that something is happening, which we like feedback, because we always want to know how we're doing. Are we doing well? Are we doing better than we did before, and better than others? Or are we doing worse than others? And here we have something to go by, a feeling of energy, or in some practices, in some groups or such training places, one is asked, what percentage of the time are you concentrating? Is it 10%, 15, 50? And if it's 50, that's considered pretty good. Maybe already a lower figure, and maybe with different training centers are different criteria of good work. But there is also this element of being graded. And as one maybe begins to observe, maybe not, this concentrative skill can come in handy during one's everyday life. When an anxiety arises, or confusion, or an anger, the practice can be there to repress it, to shove it out of the conscious mind. So one has gained something on the mat and in one's daily life. The work that we're doing here is different from this. Not that you're required to do different work, it's up to each one what you want to do. But what we're talking about here and speaking out of is an awareness that is not exclusive in any way. It has no goal. It is not a means to an end. It is simply questioning and wondering and listening to what is actually happening, actually taking place from moment to moment in this body-mind as it manifests right here on the mat or on the chair, in the kitchen, on the walk, in the bathtub or in bed. An awareness that doesn't demand concentrating on something, but allowing whatever is there to come into consciousness, into conscious awareness, without judgment, without being labeled distraction, hindrance, or help. It is asking us to look at how this mind operates and to be understanding of that, to have insight into that. Insight into a thought arising and immediately connected with the thought, the feelings and emotions of anger, fear, resentment. Not to clamp down on it, put the lid on, but to understand it. And how once feelings and emotions have been triggered by thought, how these feelings and emotions in turn generate more thoughts, either persevering in the emotion or trying to combat it, trying to condemn it. How with this, a new conflict is set up throughout the body, mind, and the feelings that go with that, to just have an embracing, encompassing, comprehending understanding of the ongoings of the human mind. Alone and in relationship with each other. Not to pursue a goal with this. If a goal is pursued, that is part of the ongoing process of the human being. Goals. And to begin to understand the function, the power of goals and what they trigger throughout the mind and body. So instead of being turned on or off by the content of thoughts, to understand the process of it. The content being of secondary importance. It's the content of our thoughts that ensnares us, wraps us up like getting caught in a spider web. But seeing the process itself is not ensnaring, because insight is free from judgment. It does not reject and it does not cling. Clinging and rejection happens in thinking. So can there be understanding of the difference of thinking and seeing? A very crucial question for each one of us to get into for ourselves. Usually one talk during a retreat, we go very concretely into the difference between thinking and seeing or hearing without thought. So that it dawns on the mind what it is, how it is caught up in thought and image, caught up to the extent of feeling imprisoned. Not just mentally, but physically. How the thought of an unhappy past experience, a painful past experience, can provoke the almost self-same feelings of pain, despair, frustration, anger. Right now, just one thought being able to trigger that. It can arouse hatred of the person who caused one that pain in the past. May have happened 15 years ago, maybe 50 years ago. Memory can be evoked at any time, unless it is so capsuled away that it just operates subterraneously, and then even more dangerously and toxically. So one can begin to learn by observing oneself how thought creates sorrow. Thought about the past, fear, which is also thought about the future, that this may happen again. The fear of loss in the future, and the bitterness of sorrow connected with that. Possibility of hatred, anxiety. For oneself, one can understand and see directly as it happens the origin of sorrow. The manifestation of it, how it affects oneself and others in relationship. And then the question, unless one is so involved in blaming others for it and seeking cures or escape on the outside, As long as that goes on, there's no understanding how one causes these things for oneself. If there is this understanding that oneself, the thoughts, memories, are deeply involved in the origin of sorrow in oneself, with that understanding there comes quite naturally the question whether there can be an ending of it, or whether this has to go on interminably, as it has throughout one's life and throughout the life of human beings on this earth. Or whether indeed insight into this whole process can be a freeing from it. This awareness that we have been talking about can become again a concentrative exercise if one, as it were, zeroes in on oneself. I got to pay attention now, every thought and every feeling, and how it feels and how it affects others and so forth. A very narrow scope. Becoming interesting to oneself. But that again is not the awareness that is talked about, because it is not exclusive of this whole vast world in which we live. We may not realize we do, because our thoughts disposes us to live in a very limited space. We all know that if we're preoccupied with some real problem or sadness or anticipation of joy, one doesn't see anything around one. The shutters are all drawn. And yet there can be an instant of awareness of that one was not aware of the rain, of the breeze, of the person right next to one. The person may have been talking to one, but one didn't hear it. It was just the mind projecting all the past and future scenarios, and the emotional involvement in it, creating this dense, tight little movie theater. So what will break down the walls? So that awareness is not limited to me, my ongoing processes, my movements, my this and that. Without excluding that, without saying don't be selfish, and therefore labeling it, judging it, and again trying to suppress what needs to be allowed to be there, touched, felt, seen, but not to become exclusive. I don't know what will do that, or what will bring it about, let's put it this way. What will bring about this insight into exclusive self-concern without judgment. Judgment follows on the heel. It seems almost inseparable, so inseparable that usually we feel left with a judgment. We haven't even noticed the moment of seeing something. The judgment has been so fast and so overpowering because so habitual that now we're left with our old bifurcation, division, me and my problems or my selfishness, my dualism. So can that be heard, seen like the drips of rain? Not making a thing out of anything, and yet aware of it, and not grabbing onto it, negatively or positively, acceptingly or rejectingly. That's what somebody said this morning. I realize I have to accept all this, what's going on. Why? Why does one have to accept anything? Because that is, again, do you see? This is division. Me separate from my stuff. A false separation, and then the effort to accept that stuff, which is me. It's not two. Can that be seen? How thought follows emotion, follows upset, follows joy, follows thought. This whole stream, ongoing stream of oneself, which is also the ongoing stream of everybody else. These streams are very, very much alike. So much so that one calls it one stream of human consciousness. Me and my. And in that stream, the idea, a very strong idea, I am separate from that stream. And one can say, it's not just an idea, wait a minute, I feel it. I feel it in my guts. Taking all the emotions and physical manifestations of the thought and attachment to me as being evidence that the me is real. The feelings and emotions are very real physical processes. Heart rate can be measured. Thoughts are also real processes. They can also be measured. Can be physically or electrically measured, a thought. A needle will jump when a thought goes through the mind. But that's the reality, as far as the reality goes. It's all thought, it's all emotion, it's all feeling, all one process. And nothing separate for it except the idea of separation. Me and my problems, me and my sadness, me and my desires, me and my fear, me and my joy. Can one question that? Question it with fervor, because this is where our problems lies, all of our sorrow and pain and irritation and frustration. In this feeling, internal feeling of separation. And not just the feeling of separation, but then the task of the me to integrate itself, to become whole, to become one, to overcome its problems, to better itself. to become special, somebody important, to attain security. Security in money or fame or acclamation or approval. And the other side of it, the fear of failure. All resulting from this ingrained, deep conviction that there is a separate me, separate from the stream of thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires, fears, and so forth. Can one investigate that? Whether this is actually so. Not take it for granted, not accept it, not reject it, but find out, grapple with it. Through observation, not through setting out to get rid of this me. This is what we usually have done. The me is bad, the me is conflict, the me is this and that, therefore let us get rid of it. And there's probably not a spiritual, religious tradition that doesn't offer its wares and ways to get rid or diminish the me. But it is the me that becomes attached to the ways and means of getting rid of itself for the sake of a future without me, which seems so much more desirable. At least if all the negative parts of the me are gone, one does not want to sacrifice the pleasurable ones. The pleasure of me in remembrance, in anticipation, in being adored by others or whatever. So we're not talking about any path to abolish or fight the me, but a very simple, factual, non-judgmental, choiceless observation. Or if that word isn't accessible, listening, seeing. Being aware of. When that starts entering one's moment-to-moment living, this choiceless, non-judgmental looking and listening, then something new is taking place. It is like the little fresh green shoots peeking through the layers of old straw. Yeah, these grass blades up on a hill, they don't do away with the straw. The straw doesn't bother them, they just grow. They're there. They're green, moist, alive. And the old stuff is no hindrance. It is touched, peeked through, and transcended. we'll end here for today.